Here's a question people often ask. How much commenting do you really need to do? How much is not enough? How much is too much? If you're using JavaDoc for your documentation, you want to include Java documentation for every method, class and field constant that people might want to know about in your code. So that includes at least the public ones. The question about whether it includes private ones is slightly more complex. Within your own code, let's look at a few examples. So one thing you shouldn't do is to write comments that aren't useful to anybody. Okay? You should always wonder, why are you writing a comment, who is going to want to read it, and how is it going to benefit them. So don't write comments which are glaringly obvious to your target reader just from looking at the code. Slight word of caution here. If your target reader is you, and you have just understood for the first time some feature of a programming language, then it can be quite useful to include a comment for yourself to remind yourself of a thing you've just learnt about how the feature works that you're using. So here are some examples of comments that are probably really just too much. So assume the person reading your code understands Java at least as well as you do. Don't write comments that are just not true, like this one. There's an old saying that says if the code and the comments disagree, both are probably wrong. More interestingly, try to avoid comments which would be better replaced by clearer code. So the best way to write code is so lucidly that the code doesn't need any comments in order to explain what it does. That's a counsel of perfection, but it's well worth stretching for. Choosing good names is of absolutely key importance here. This is, by the way, a topic that you're likely to cover in a later design course if you do one. So here is a better version of that code in which we've chosen better names. Sometimes you get very cross and it's very tempting to write rather cryptic comments like this. You will find them. Sometimes it feels cathartic to write them, but just don't. Just don't do it. So the key reason why you want to include a comment is if there is something non-obvious about the way the code is working, but there's a good reason for it, then sometimes you want to include a comment to explain what the good reason is. Comments are only one aspect of readable code. In many ways, a more important aspect of writing readable code is to follow a consistent coding style. So follow the standard naming conventions, which I've mentioned from time to time, about how classes, methods and variables are named, use a consistent spacing, place brackets consistently, and so on and so forth. The code samples in these slides are not perfect. In tidying them up prior to doing this recording, I've done lots of fixing of small issues in the code examples, but I've probably missed some. There is a useful document called the Inf1B Coding Conventions document, which you should read, mark, learn, inwardly digest and follow. Okay, so back on to thinking about libraries. When you get a bunch of library code from somewhere else, how is it actually used? It's often distributed as what's called a jar file. You don't in this course need to know very much about jar files, but it is useful to know that they exist. And as always, you can look up more details if you want to know. Okay, so summary. The Java language comes with a set of predefined classes and they wrap up the most often used functionality. We can organise classes by topic if you like. It's useful to know about strings and string formatting. That's the kind of thing, it could go in almost any lecture. It happens to have landed in this one. It's really important to write good documentation and comments and to follow coding conventions, and sometimes you will want to use third-party libraries. And the reading for this lecture is roughly speaking that.